Hi everyone and welcome. I'm starting today's video as I do sometimes with my tracking spreadsheet. And this is just to put things into perspective a little bit to show what my game plan is for today. I've been doing something a little differently lately. You can see some evidence of it here. It's these little open brackets, and it's kind of my little homespun shorthand method of indicating work to be done. It's sort of meant to indicate a checkbox, which at some point would be filled in with a check, or maybe more elaborately. As you can see, I don't just put check boxes in here, I put details about what we're actually done, but they're just indications of work to be done. And today we're in the first day of October, and you can see down here in the October 1 column, I've got a number of these open brackets specced out as the work to be done today, or what I had planned to do today. And number one is that I want to create a video of today's work, and we're already now started into that activity. And the first thing you see down here is the first of my nightcrawler bins. It's actually, you can see all the way over here, you can see it's a VermiBag, not a bin. It's a VermiBag mini with the European nightcrawlers, the ENC worms. And back here, you can see that it was 11 days ago the last time we checked in on that bin, at which point it was fed. And since I'm going to be going away for a few days, I just been wanting to make sure that all my bins are well fed before I go, so that I don't leave any of my worm bins hungry. So in addition to feeding the European nightcrawlers in the VermiBag Mini, you can also see another of these work to be done indicators right over here, alongside my 13-day-old VermiBag tote. The VermiBag tote has the African nightcrawlers in it. So I've been using the yellow as an indicator that these are European or African nightcrawlers, just nightcrawlers in general, distinguishing them from what you could see here in green, which is the red wigglers, and the one line you see here with the cross hatching on it is actually a container that's outside. It's a fabric grow bag, and nowhere here does it say that it's outside, I don't think. The worms that populate that at the present time are worms that I gathered from my compost bin outside, and the worms just came from who knows where, out of the soil into the bin. And I've been gradually collecting more and more worms out of that container to get this bin populated. And at this point, I estimate that that container has a pretty good sized population in it. Something that I had actually planned on doing today, and I've sort of scratched it and deferred it till later, which was I was going to actually launch off a second bin with these African nightcrawlers. And you can see the placeholder for it down here. It's a new bin that I built 2 days ago, and I had originally scratched in an additional checkbox over here indicating that I would like to implement this next step over here of populating that new bin with some of the African nightcrawlers that are presently occupying the VermiBag tote. And this would be the first time that I've actually started to expand my population, but I have thought that it might be nice to have sort of a secondary container in which I've got the African nightcrawlers. And I've actually thought the same thing too. Should some sort of a problem befall my European nightcrawler VermiBag Mini, it would be kind of nice to know that I've got European nightcrawlers elsewhere in my population, and I'm not keeping all my eggs in one basket, so to speak. So that's kind of all I'm after today. I've got some stuff in the freezer with which I'm going to feed these two systems today. So let me go over to the refrigerator now, grab those things, and we'll get this work underway. So I guess we'll begin down here in the VermiBag Mini where the European nightcrawlers reside. And if you've been following my channel, you'll know that one thing I've been struggling with here is flying insects, and it seems like the spiders in my basement must have overheard me complaining about the issue, so they've apparently come to help. So they've set up a little barricade here over the worm bin to try to capture any possible little flying intruders. So you can see my little friend right there, little friend the spider. So maybe with the help of this little guy, we've finally tackled the flying insect issue in this bin. So let's see if we can figure out where we stand with that issue and get down into the bin and see how things are looking. Regrettably, we're going to have to damage the spider web while we're pulling out this cardboard. The cardboard's covered in white powder known as Diatomaceous Earth, and that stuff is kind of a kind of an anti-insect powder. It's a natural substance, but it's a very, very, very coarse substance when you look at it under a microscope, and it has the ability to get in between the connecting points of an insect's exoskeleton, if that's what they call it, and eventually it does cause lacerations, and ultimately the insect ends up getting killed because of the loss of moisture through those lacerations. At least that's my understanding of the way this stuff is meant to work. Luckily, it has no ability to harm the worms, so you don't have to worry if some of it ends up in the bin. But you do need to keep it dry if you're going to try using it against insects. As soon as it gets damp, if it were in the bin mixed in with the rest of the stuff, it would be it would not work, basically. So we've not been in here for 11 days, and frankly, I don't even remember what the last feeding looked like. Can't remember if it was a big feeding, small feeding, what it was. I'm kind of coming in here blind, not knowing what to expect. Sometimes I'll do a little prep work and refresh my memory on how things went the last go around, so I partially know what to expect, and also so I can try to follow through any sort of thinking that may have occurred in previous check-ins. So I was just kind of observing around here on the edges to see how moisture levels are looking. But they're looking really nice. The moisture level's holding up quite nicely out on the very far edges. I had, for the longest time, I had always suspected that the content of my bag was a little bit overly dry because of moisture being lost, possibly through the fabric walls themselves. Because that is one of the selling points of this, is the fact that it does allow for airflow. But it doesn't seem to be the case, really. I mean, I don't have to go very deep to find some really nice material right there near the surface once I scrape back some of this stuff on the top surface. And even on the very edges, I guess because the material is quite nice, there are worms hanging out pretty much everywhere. Definitely like the way stuff looks in this bin. In the beginning it seemed like it got off to a slow start, but now that this thing's been in service for quite some time, it's really kind of starting to take shape nicely. Like here's a piece of food that's quite dry, as a matter of fact, so this has got to get sunken down if I expect for it to make any progress. Sitting out on the surface and being dry makes it almost impossible for the worms to get at it. That was the inside of the pit, so I just jammed it back in there for whatever reason. So I'm not really on any sort of a specific mission here today. In a way, I do feel like maybe we've actually succeeded in doing away with the flying insect situation, maybe with the help of the spider, or thanks to the help of the spider or spiders. I mean, if there were still no more flying insects here, maybe the spider wouldn't even be around anymore. So maybe there is an ongoing threat of future intrusion by flying insects. So my hope is that the spider goes ahead and makes himself at home again and resets his web on top of my bag here for future pest control. Now, as I start to make my way down through the middle area of this bin, which is where I last fed, I'm starting to encounter little bits and pieces of stuff. The first few things that I ran into was something that I fed maybe 2 months ago, which was a corn cob that I had sliced into little round discs. And each disc at this point is really more of kind of a donut in a way, because the inner part of it was already chewed out for the most part, and now they're finally making their way through the remainder of the corn cob. Very fragile little bits of food anymore. They really don't hold together much. But there's going to be a whole bunch of them in here, because I did feed quite a number of them, at least a good big handful. And I had talked about in the past, maybe, you know, I had considered crumbling those things up. But it's always kind of interesting to run into them to see how things are progressing. This is another mango pit. But in this case, you know, I'm wondering what that stuff is over there. I think part of the shell or whatever this is right here, it does seem to have little creepy crawlies hanging out on it. Probably mites or something. Over here too. I mean, mites are a natural helper that are probably present in almost every bin. It's just that when they're in very small numbers, you don't really see them. They're kind of like the cleanup crew, actually. I think I've observed in my time-lapse videos the way they zero in on a worm that has met its demise, one that has passed on, and then they seem to come in there and they just seem to gobble up the worm carcass. So I think that they do definitely serve a important role, so I wouldn't really be looking to eliminate them. The only times you're going to find yourself wanting to get rid of them is when they really seem to have overrun your bin. And usually that's an indication of something that needs to be addressed, some sort of either excess moisture, I think, will normally trigger kind of an outbreak of too many mites. Some other conditions that are controllable, obviously. If you're getting too moist and you find that happening, I think you can just, you know, pretty easily work on reducing the moisture in the bin to try to get things under control. But usually when you see stuff going awry, it's an indication of something that's happening, something that might have been preventable, something you can often undo with a little bit of effort. But troubleshooting stuff in bins is always kind of interesting. So even in my case with the flying insect issue, if you've been here for a while, you know that that cardboard with the Diatomaceous Earth resting on top of it has been around for months and months now at this point. At least that's my best guess for how long it's been around, but I've kind of lost track because it does seem like it's been such a long time. I'm bumping into little bits of bedding and cardboard, paper, as well as little food scraps once in a while. It does seem like there was a fair bit of cardboard placed in here at some point not too long ago. From the look of it, it was I think it was a hacked up egg carton, cardboard egg carton, just judging from some of the shapes of some of the pieces and from the texture of the material. It's not like a corrugated cardboard, it's more of like a formed sort of a cardboard, I think, whatever that kind of cardboard is referred to as. This is another piece of corn cob, but one where it was not cut up into little discs or rings. It's pretty interesting because it's miniature. It's not miniature corn or baby corn. It's regular corn cob that's been getting whittled down over time by the worms. So in time it does get there, but that's the thing, is time. It takes a huge amount of time for corn cob to get broken down. That was my main reason for wanting to chunk it up into small, tiny pieces. I had thought about maybe putting more bedding into here. So I even bought over a container with some diced up chunks of cardboard in it. It's right here on the table, ready to be used if need be, but from the look of it, all this stuff that I've been collecting here as I've been poking around is primarily cardboard. So I think we could just continue using existing bedding material in here without needing to add more. I just thought that if at some point a bin starts to look like it's running a little bit low on bedding, it would make good sense to supplement that, but it does seem like there's quite a bit here that I've been stacking up, so we'll just use that as the foundation for our feeding. Lots and lots of it all over the place. So I mean, I'm sure I could probably keep on digging and finding stuff, but this ain't really an archaeological dig here. We're here to feed these little guys. So I don't want to keep taking up too much time. Why don't we just go ahead and make sure we've got ourselves a pretty good size hole here. We'll drop in the bedding and whatnot that we collected in the bottom, and then we'll stack in the new food. It is kind of nice though. Almost everywhere you look throughout the material, there's just, you know, a plentiful amount of European nightcrawlers occupying this stuff. Alright, so the food that I've got is mostly just kitchen scraps, vegetables and stuff like that, but I've also got some old cereal here. Stuff that just kind of ended up in the back of the cupboard and never got eaten. It's starting to get a little bit stinky and funky. So I don't think it's really fit for human consumption anymore, but I got a feeling the worms are going to like it. So before we start dropping in the new food, I think it's time to collect all of this stuff that we encountered on the way down. Some of it's old food, some of these mango pits and whatnot, corn chunks, but most of it's cardboard. There's a whole bunch of it here, so I think we've got a nice foundation of carbon-rich bedding material to begin with here. I think I've gotten the most of it. So before we drop in the frozen veggies, I'm just going to pour in some of this cereal that I bought down here. This isn't really a name brand cereal. I think this stuff, gosh, it goes so far back I can't remember anymore. It might have come from some sort of like an Aldi or some other place where they don't really sell that much name brand stuff. There's usually kind of an off brand, but besides what appears to be puffed rice, which is the majority of this stuff, you can see there's also, I think, walnuts or pecans or whatever these nuts are. And I thought I also saw what appeared to be slivers of almonds. And there's there's kind of a brown sugar or molasses or some sort of a sweet smell. So it's, you know, somehow sweetened with what would probably be marketed as a some sort of a natural sweetener. I'm wondering if what I'm seeing here are oats, maybe oats in here alongside the puffed rice, and oh, almonds, pieces of almonds too. I mean, you saw that it was in plastic, in a plastic container, so the original box is long gone, or maybe it came in a bag, who knows. So I don't even remember what this stuff was. It goes so far back. All right, let's toss in some veggies too. All right, so I'm using both hands here. I wanted to grab a good big kind of handful plus. So you can see I've used these leaves to take the stems of whatever vegetable it was that I had chopped up into little pieces and make these little bundles. So these are all kinds of this and that, and I think there's maybe some broccoli mixed in here too. I'm not sure. I think there's mushroom here as well. Some bits and pieces of mushroom cuttings. So yeah, this should make for a pretty good meal for these little guys. I think they're going to enjoy this, especially if it's going to be another 10 plus days like it was the last time before I come back in here to tend to their needs. So I'm just going to cover up here, and I'm starting to wonder if it's going to be necessary anymore to replace that cardboard that had that Diatomaceous Earth sprinkled across the top of it. I'm starting to feel like maybe it's time to start trying to wean myself off that that stuff to see if in fact maybe the flying insect issue in this bin has finally gone away. I mean, I don't see any. I didn't observe any at all when we first got in here. Although when I watch the video, when I get on the computer for editing and composition, I'll probably be able to see something, at least a couple of them. But not like it had been in the past where they're buzzing around all over the place and getting in my face. So maybe we'll be okay with just a little piece of paper in here and a plastic to cover that up. So I'm just going to trade in that piece of cardboard for a single sheet of newspaper. And I believe what that's going to do is become a landing pad for any moisture that it attempts to collect onto this piece of plastic bag. And I think that piece of paper is going to become a really popular place for the worms to come and hang out. Okay, I spent a little more time in here than I thought I would. I think I was really distracted by the fact that I did see lots and lots of worms the entire time, which I normally don't see. A lot of times I go digging through here and I don't see so many worms and I wonder where are they, but looks like we've got a pretty good active population. They really seem to be enjoying the material that they're inhabiting right there on the surface or right below the surface. So now we're ready to head over to the African nightcrawlers in the VermiBag tote. So let's head over there now. Okay, so now this African nightcrawler system is a fabric bag, just like the one we just checked in on. But while that one is set up as a so-called continuous flow-through system, where you end up just ejecting the contents of the bin at the very bottom after the stuff in there has been reduced to only worm compost. This one's a little bit more traditional in terms of it just being a straight up container, and the only difference being the material that it's made out of. You can see a little red mite cruising over there on the edge of the newspaper. But luckily that's the only one I see. This piece of paper is exactly the way I would have expected to find it, which is covered with moisture that was trying to evaporate out of the bin but got caught by that piece of plastic we just removed when we first started. And in time I think it's going to become sort of a popular spot for the worms to come hang out on. A lot of times they come right up onto that paper where the moisture's so abundant. This is the dividing wall that I had used when I had set up the horizontal migration in the previous container that these little guys were all pulled out of. And you can see this bin is still quite full of all kinds of uneaten bedding materials, cardboard, leaves. Not a very old bin. The worms were placed in here not too long ago. So I think this might only be its third feeding, maybe third or fourth feeding. I think it's been about a month now since the first round of worms started getting placed into this bin. And it may have been about a week ago since the last few worms were added to this. So I believe that the population of this container is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,000 or so worms. It looks like they're all kind of out here to greet us, which is kind of nice. It's always sort of an oddity for me because I always expect the night crawlers to not really be jumbled together very much. And I got to admit that they're not really jumbled together here either, but they are just all over the place in pretty good numbers. They just don't seem to assemble into a worm ball the way red wigglers do. The red wiggler worms will just be in a mob piled on top of each other. Here you could see a lot of them, but they all seem to take their own little space and keep their distance from one another. And they just don't seem to pile up and generate a worm ball necessarily. I guess maybe in some cases you could potentially encounter that here and there depending on your feeding style or whatever the situation might be in that bin. But right here I don't think we've yet generated that sort of an environment where we would expect to see a lot of worms just all jumbled together. Although somehow when I run my fingers through here it does feel like we got a good number of worms hanging out down here. The material in this bin is not too deep yet. Pretty shallow. So I do want to go down almost to the very bottom to make sure everything that I put in here is submerged and not sitting out, poking through the top layer of the surface. So I've managed to pile things up pretty good here and make myself a little bit of a divot to drop today's feeding into. I'm hoping we've left ourselves enough material here on the sides to backfill and completely cover whatever it is that we put in here. I've been trying to identify what the last feeding might have been by looking at what remains, and if I'm not mistaken, this is probably a banana peel. Definitely getting worked down good. It's fairly thin. And seeing tons and tons of bedding materials. Now, this would probably be maybe a mango peel. So it does seem like there's still some scraps of food in here, but nothing really jumped out as me as, a clear indication that there's still tons of leftovers in here. And I believe it's been, what, less than a week? I don't remember what the spreadsheet said. I don't believe it's been a full week yet since we came in here to feed and to add more worms. So it does seem like they're doing a pretty good job depleting whatever rations they've been provided in the past. So let's proceed with giving these guys a little bit of cereal too. I'll be curious to see how these, I don't know if these are walnuts or pecans or what they are, but I'll be curious to see how these proceed to getting consumed. There are a couple in here. There were a couple in the other one too. I just wonder if we'll encounter them in the future, or will they get gobbled up quickly? I'm curious. We'll see. And I've got what remains in the bag that we're just going to empty into here now and give them everything that remains. I guess there's some cauliflower in here too. Here's some of the broccoli I think I mentioned earlier. And these are the leaves of, you could buy certain vegetables in a big bunch where they actually give you the leaves, kind of when you buy a bunch of carrots. Same thing with this stuff. So there was just a whole bunch of leaves that came along for the ride, as well as the stems to those leaves, which I took the time to chop up into little bits. So we can spread that stuff around too. So this should hopefully sustain them for a little while. Probably won't see many remains of this stuff though once we get back in here. There's some mushroom, I think. There's that paper. It's hard to say. That's a mushroom stem for sure. I mean, it certainly doesn't seem like much, but I'm sure it'll be enough to keep them going for a while. Luckily, if the food supply should run a little short, luckily worms can always turn to the bedding material that they live in to also eat that. And there's obviously plenty of that in here too, so I certainly have no reason for concern here. So all I'm trying to do is see if I can spot any of the food items from previous feedings, any of the leftovers from the past, just to make sure I'm putting them down here in the feeding area as opposed to simply leaving them out on the surface on top. And I mean, I'll be covering up with the newspaper and the plastic and the cardboard. So it's not like it's just going to be exposed to the air. Definitely not going to be rolling out the red carpet to try to encourage passerby insects to infest my bin. But it always seems prudent to, do your best to keep the food under the surface if possible, rather than just having it spread out across the top. I guess it really just depends on your style and your own system and how it's protected from the onslaught of intruders. Maybe you've got a more substantial lid or cover, and a lot of times it's just individual style or preference. That's the beauty of vermicomposting. It's a extremely flexible hobby pastime, and you can just apply your own personal artistic license to it any which way you like for the most part. So I think things are looking pretty nice here with the night crawlers. As you might recall on the spreadsheet earlier, I did indicate that I've got a new spot, another bin that I built a few days ago that's in the process of kind of aging and priming. And at some point I think I'm going to take some volunteers out of this bin and relocate them into that new container so that I have a second African nightcrawler container. And at some point I might actually do the same with the European nightcrawlers too, get some of the worms out of that VermiBag mini that we just fed earlier, and see if I can get a secondary system with European nightcrawlers going in it as well. So those are some of the things that I envision myself getting involved with in the near future. In fact, I might have actually done the African nightcrawler setup of the new bin today with some volunteers from this bin, but I just figured I was going to hold off on doing that. Give it a few more days before I actually delve into that. Today I just wanted to get a feeding done, and now we're done. So that's a good thing. All right, everyone, I've got a little bit of cleaning up to do around here, and I'll put everything else away, but I'm not going to bore you with that. This is the end of the video, but before I go, let me really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for sticking around and keeping me company. I always appreciate that. So, if you liked the video, I sure hope you did, please remember to give me a thumbs up, and also consider subscribing to the channel too. Those are really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.